Welcome to Every Dollar Counts with Josh and Jay, a shot of true serum for your investment and insurance questions. I'm Josh Null, the owner of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jay Stubbs, director of the Gulf Coast for First Protective. We are brought to you on the Prime Capital Investment Advisors podcast network. Jay, buddy, how you doing?
Josh, I'm doing great. It's good to be with you in studio and talking about some of these very important topics on qualified planning, specific to 401k plans, and some other aspects that agents, advisors, and clients need to know about this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to thank you for joining me today because we have a very special episode. It's dedicated specifically to 401k plan sponsors and business owners. So, Jay, I recently completed a qualified plan educational series called the 401k Project, and it featured the contributions of Matthew Eickman. He's the National Retirement Practice Leader for Prime Capital Investment Advisors and Qualified Plan Advisors. For those of y'all that may not be familiar with those two companies, my company, Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, is part of the Prime Capital's network of independent advisors, which really gives me the support of a multi-billion-dollar investment company, but still provides for independence and ownership of my practice.
That's a great resource for you, Josh. Amazing resource, and I'm so thankful that you've got it to bring to your clientele.
To be quite honest, Jay, it allows me to compete with the big boys, because I can be local, I can be independent, I can have ownership of my book, but I have the resources, many team members at my disposal that can help me come in and really service and work with my clients to the highest level. So, Jay, Matthew and I capped off our series with a webinar where we discussed the most important items that plan sponsors need to tackle in 2020. So what I did is I selected a few important clips from that webinar that you and I are going to provide some context to. Now, listeners, I want you to note that Matthew Eickman has experience as a ERISA attorney, many years of experience. So it's very detailed and very relevant information, particularly to the plan sponsors and business owners listening to our podcast. I will go even so far as to say this, Jay. As you know, I'm a lifelong basketball junkie.
That's right.
And as you also know, and many people that meet me out in public know, I'm not what you would call tall.
No, you're challenged vertically.
Challenged vertically, yeah. So anytime that I would step on the basketball court over the years, I had to kind of do a little mental exercise to tell myself, well, I belonged here. I know these guys are bigger, faster, and stronger, but I'll find a way. And I did over the years. Well, the reason I bring that up is because, stepping on the court, Matthew Eickman in this space was kind of like stepping on the court with Michael Jordan. I mean, you're talking about the top of the top in these items. So I think the listeners, as you listen to what Matthew has to say and my feedback, you're really seeing someone that has crafted his experience and his art to the highest level. And I highly encourage you to take a listen to what he has to say.
And there's some urgency to the messaging and the content that we're about to give you all. So listen, share, listen again, and make sure that you're understanding all of the components that you're going to hear.
Yeah, these are items that plan sponsors need to tackle now, not next year or the following year. These are things that are important right now. Jay, this episode, we're going to discuss the electronic disclosure rule, something that was already in motion before COVID hit, but became even more relevant as COVID and the global pandemic forced really unprecedented changes on plan participants. Matthew Eickman and I discussed the history of the rule, how the rule works, important actions that plan sponsors need to take now, and a variety of other issues related to how technology has changed. Now, I know in your line of work, servicing advisors like me up and down the Gulf Coast, and particularly in your role with First Protective, you've always been on the forefront of technology. So, what experience have you had with electronic disclosure as relate to ERISA trying to keep up with modern day communication style?
Well, I am a plan participant, so I have experienced the electronic disclosure. You have to plan participants have to know what's going on and how to access. Simple things like user IDs and passwords and two device verification, getting that text on your mobile phone. That could be confusing to some people. So my suggestion is advisors need to know about their respective plans and the electronic disclosure rules of the road, if you will, and the directions, so that they can clearly communicate that to clients when they're going to have a problem. They're going to have issues accessing it. You better be on the ready to immediately shoot them the material they need in order to access, and then just be able to clearly communicate this is the future.
Right. Well, one fun thing from this clip, Jay, is the ERISA was started in 1974. I was born in 1975. So Matthew has a timeline on his webinar of the evolution of disclosure rules, and it really kind of mirrors my life. It's funny, some of the stuff, we made a joke that, in 1998 when I got married, my wedding gift to my wife, Jennifer, was a cell phone. And she was actually kind of thrilled about it. If I gave her a cell phone now as a gift, she'd look at me like I'd lost my mind.
Well, Times have definitely changed, and the technology is great, but you're still going to have a client calling in saying, hey, how do I fax this in?
Yeah, that's right. So, well, that's all well set up. So without further ado, let's hear our clip from the discussion with Matthew Eickman and myself. But before we dive into all that, though, let's have our friends from Sloth Racer kick us off.
That they know what lies ahead.
Very good.
And actually, Josh, as I think about that and kind of looking ahead, so employers right now need to be understanding, looking backwards, what's in place from the CARES Act, but looking forward, what do they need to be ready for? Well, frankly, that also relates to this electronic disclosure rule. And that's the second big item that we want employers thinking about is how can we, as an organization, take advantage of this new rule from the Department of Labor that relates to electronic disclosure. And what's really fascinating about the electronic disclosure regulation that came from the Department of Labor over the summer is that the timing of it actually had nothing to do with COVID-19. It actually had nothing to do with the fact that a lot of employees are now working from home or they're working remotely and they're not getting as much paper at their desk, for example. The timing was just fortuitous. It's something that the Department of Labor has been working on for a long time. In fact, you know how long they've been working on it? Many, many, many years, decades, in fact. So think about how much has changed since ERISA went into place. So ERISA was signed into law in 1974, became effective in 1975. And how did we exchange information? Can you imagine in 1974, the idea that somebody would be walking around looking at a message from somebody on their watch? Right, we'd see that on some sort of spy show on TV, perhaps, but it would be so futuristic and we really wouldn't take it seriously. And you get it to 2002, and in 2002, the Department of Labor said, things have started to change. People are starting to use this email to communicate. They're starting to get information on their computers. We need a disclosure rule that says to employers, if you need to get information to your people, you can send it to them electronically. For the last 18 years, the pace of change from a communications and a technology standpoint has been probably increasing year over year over year. And yet we have been relying upon an electronic disclosure rule that's about 18 years old. And here's why that was so problematic. That rule from 2002, it said you can provide a disclosure to your employees. You can do it electronically if they fit into one of two categories. Number one, they have to be what we kind of think about as being wired at work. What does that mean? It means they use a computer as an integral part of their day-to-day duties. So you run a manufacturing plant and you're looking at all of your employees. Tell me, what percentage of your people is that going to cover? It'll cover some of them, right? Is it going to cover everybody? Absolutely not. So then the second step is to get an opt-in, an affirmative step from employees to say, I do want to receive information electronically. Well, we all know from all areas of life that getting somebody to opt in takes an extra step as opposed to a default that says to them, you're in unless you opt out. And that's where the big change comes into play with the new electronic disclosure regulation. It establishes a new structure that is referred to as a notice and access or an opt-out provision. Employees now will be told, you have something available to you electronically. Here's the link to go and access it. If you don't want to get information electronically moving forward, here's how you opt out. So Josh, that's an incredibly significant change for employers. And we want to spend the next couple of minutes helping employers figure out, okay, that's all great, but what steps do we need to take so that we can get ready to do it? And what's interesting about the regulation is that it says to employers, hey, you can do this in a couple different ways. You can put it on a website, or you can email the information directly to your people. So it can be an attachment or it can be in the body of the email, but you have some choices. And the Department of Labor said, hey, we want you to be able to start using this as soon as you can. So when the new regulation came out, it said, hey, it's not technically effective for 60 days, but it's practically effective now, so go ahead and use it. So a lot of employers see that and they say, hey, that's cool. So can we start doing this right away? Can we go ahead and follow this notice and access structure? And if we do that, are we good to go? Or they say, well, hey, we've already been doing this for some of our people. So does that have any impact on what we've been doing? And it's really critical for employers to know there's a bunch of preliminary steps or some very specific preliminary steps they need to take. And then in addition to that, without trying to dive in and figure out which employees are using it for what reason and which employees are not, the best approach, Josh, is probably kind of a start from scratch mode where we say, let's take the new rule and let's apply it to everybody.
Well, Matthew, I have a question for you, but before I do that, I'm probably not the only person joining us or seeing this webinar that on your graph that showed the past, present, and future was born in or around the beginnings of the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, and also, went through the technology transition through the 90s and the early 2000s. In fact, my wedding gift to my wife was a cell phone in 1998, which just sounds ridiculous at this point, right? So the point of that is you really hit on the head is, it's great that they have caught up to how quickly technology has changed and how the rate of change is accelerating to where, you can use these devices, but obviously there's steps that need to happen for plan sponsors to do so. So my question is, what are the specific steps that plan sponsors need to take right now as it relates to electronic disclosure?
Yeah, and it's particularly important, Josh, because it's really easy to get swept up in, I hesitate to say the excitement, but maybe it's the relief. A lot of employers are saying, oh, goodness, we finally can do this and deal with paper a little bit less. Or how about for employers who have said, hey, our workforce, they're all wired at work or they've opted in. It's our terminated employees that have caused us to send out a bunch of extra paper. How can we recover from that? How can we get to a position where we're not having to provide information in that way? And the nice thing about this new regulation is that it contemplates that. So for employers who are out there and thinking about this, these are the steps that you as a company need to start. And you'll see step 1 and step 2 are things that need to start this year. And that will then allow you to take steps 3 and steps 4. So as a starting point, it all starts with building an email list. We have to have a list. Now, you could use smartphone telephone numbers too. I've kind of left that out of my talk here because I don't think that'll be the approach that a lot will want to take. But start with an email list. You have to build that list and understand that that's a critical starting point. Do you know why? Because you have to give a paper notice to each individual. And that paper notice will say, essentially, we now are going to provide you information electronically. We are going to send it to the following email address, fill in the blank, period. If you want to opt out, these are the steps that you can take to opt out. But if you don't do that, we'll send you that information. So you cannot rely upon this new rule. And notice you take step one, which is to have a list, and step 2, to send out that paper notice. That paper notice is kind of the key that unlocks the ability to really rely upon the entire structure. And then we can start using that structure. So as I mentioned, it's already become practically effective. It's there, but it's a locked door until we unlock it with that paper notice. And then this will be really important for employers. What do we do on an ongoing basis to ensure that we have a consistent list that we can work from? So you go out and you gather the initial emails. We start to use those. What do you do when you have a new hire? How are you taking that email and making sure that you add that to the list? What about when one of your employees leaves? Well, the regulation was so thoughtful to the point it actually distinguishes between whether you are using that employee's work address or private address. If it's a work address, the regulation says you need to get an updated private address that you know the employee will have access to after he or she leaves your company. But if it was already a private address, you don't have to get a new one. You can actually continue to use that unless one bounces back later, you get an undeliverable message of some sort. So it's really important. And I think one final note, and actually this will transition us really nicely into the next big item, which relates to financial wellness. You know what excites me the most about all this is that when we work with employers right now and we say, hey, we want to get a message out to your employees. Think about being in late March or early April when the market's really choppy and we say, hey, we want to get a note out to them that just says, hey, we're paying attention to this. Here are our phone numbers. Call if you need anything. We want to do that. And a lot of employers would say, we don't have a real good email list. Some do. Or they'd say, we have emails for some, but not all. Or we don't have any for our terminated people. Or you know what if an employer says, hey, we're going to furlough 25% of our workforce. And we say, hey, we'd like to be able to help them through this. And they'd say, we just don't have good contact information. My hope is that 12 to 18 months from now, this electronic disclosure rule it will not be seen as some way to comply with regulations. It'll be seen as an opportunity to communicate better with people. And Josh, if we get to that point, that allows employers really to accomplish more in this big critical area. And we started up front by saying we had 4 very kind of time-sensitive, relatively urgent matters for employers to be aware of.
All right, so plan sponsors and business owners, what you just heard was a discussion between Matthew Eickman and myself related to the big items that plan sponsors need to tackle in 2020. I do believe this is a great representation of the experience and expertise that Gulf Coast Financial Advisors brings to the table, and really that's enhanced by the combination of the significant resources available to me through Qualified Plan Advisors. So if you're a plan sponsor or business owner located along the Gulf Coast and you'd like to have a conversation about these issues, you can call us at 251-327-2124, or you can always visit my website at gulfcoastfa.com. That's FA as in financial advisor.
Josh, you've got some good material on your website that business owners and plan participants can go and look into, can't you?
I do, Jay. And specific to this topic, I actually have a dedicated landing page called the 401k Forum, where you're going to find this information, related podcast articles. It's obviously going to be very CARES Act and COVID related, but that's what should be on top of mind for plan sponsors right now. So I really encourage you all to visit that website, take time to listen to the full webinar, and dive into the other materials that we have there. And then also, lastly, to all you independent and semi-independent advisors and agents out there, hearing the value that Jay Stubbs could bring to your practice, you can always find him at jstubbs.com. That's JAYSTUBBS.com. Jay, any final thoughts?
Josh, this webinar that you did, you and Matthew did, is fantastic content. I really enjoyed listening to it and taking a lot of notes and just soaking up all the information. A lot of change, especially in retirement planning in 2020. When you look at the CARES Act and the Secure Act and all of the details that we did in these episodes, really, really important information for people to soak up.
I think it's fair to say that 2020 will go down not only as in society as a time of unprecedented change, but you really had a lot of things come to a head as it relates to qualified plans, particularly 401ks. So yes, highly encourage, I agree with you, Jay, highly encourage people, especially if you are someone that sponsors a plan or is a business owner offering a 401k or are thinking about offering a 401k plan to your employees. Take the time, take a listen. You'll be much better educated. Well, Jay, before we go, we got to do quick housekeeping for compliance.
Yes, please do.
Yep. Jay Stubbs and First Protective are not affiliated with Prime Capital Investment Advisors, Qualified Plan Advisors, or Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. And Josh Null and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors are not affiliated with First Protective. Jay, I want to thank many thanks to our producer, Johnny Gwynn of Deep Fried Studios. I want to thank you, obviously. And then a special thanks to Matthew Eickman for taking the time to provide so much knowledge to my network. He really put a lot of time and effort into this, and it shows. And then finally, a huge shout out to all y'all that have joined Jay and I in this journey. To those of you all joining us now, check out our previous episodes. You're going to be pleasantly surprised. If you like the show, do me a favor. Please subscribe on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And while you're there, you would be doing us a huge favor if you would rate and review the show. It helps other listeners like you find us. Lastly, if you like the show music, go check out slothracerband.com. That's slothracerband.com. And they're going to take us home now. This has been Every Dollar Counts with Josh and Jay. Advisory services offered through Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, PCIA, a federally registered investment advisor. PCIA, doing business as Prime Capital Wealth Management, PCWM, and Qualified Plan Advisors, QPA. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors is independent of Prime Capital Advisors. Information presented for educational purposes only, is not an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. All investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, be sure to consult a tax professional before implementing any tax or investment strategies.